Going to turn over this panel to Vijaykumar for CH2M Hill, who is one of the parts of our working group, our working committee, and also with his firm, our summit sponsor. So Vijay, I hand it off to you.
Thank you, John. Just 2 years ago, NASA scientists started jumping up and down. These people respect gravity. Now, it's unusual for these people to jump up and down. Not like these engineers, always trying to push water uphill. These guys respect gravity. They started jumping up and down because they found water on Mars. As you know, they spend a lot of money looking for water in outer space. Again, we don't know whether they found Mars water or just traces of water, but they are so happy. So that shows the importance of water. You heard a presentation from this morning about how California is growing, and we need more water. California is growing because this is the land of opportunities. Most of you know that California is the 9th biggest economy in the world. That means we continue to attract people, businesses. So we need to provide water for municipal, agriculture, as well as environmental needs. So when it comes to water, I have good news and bad news. The good news is it's a global challenge. Everybody in the globe has similar issues. The bad news is we need to solve it at a regional level, at the local level. It's not like the Western power grid where you can get water from other part of the country when we have drought. I wish when it's flooding in Australia, we could get that water, but not feasible. So from that perspective, water is a regional, local issue, and we need to put our thinking hats and solve the water problems. Thanks to BPC, we assembled a great panel of worldwide experts who have a great perspective on these challenges, and they're going to discuss about whether we need to increase water supply or conserve more or do a combination of that. The first speaker is Michael Norton. Michael Norton has about 40 years of experience dealing with water resources and urban water. He's a professional associate at Brunel University and worked with the World Economic Forum's Water Initiative from 2008 to 2011. Before I hand over to Michael, I will encourage you to write your questions on those cards, the blue cards that we're going to pass around. And also do me a favor and write the speaker's name so that way I don't have to guess whom I should ask. Okay, so that will help me to direct to the correct speaker. And if we cannot get to all your questions, that's why we will get those questions to them and they'll be able to answer. And then John promised to put it on the website or share with you later. Again, the first speaker is Michael Norton.
Put the presentation up, Ariel.
This one. Okay, just press the first one.
Yeah. This one? Yeah, that's great. Thank you. Well, thank you, Vijay. Thank you for the introduction. And thank you very much indeed for the Bay Planning Coalition to invite me here. I have to say it's with some trepidation I sit here as a British water engineer talking in a Californian water forum. California I've always thought of as being the kind of mecca for water management. So I'm in trepidation. Excuse my voice, it's a bit wheezy because I'm recovering from a cold. Anyway, as I hope I can bring perhaps a global dimension to the discussions this morning. Those very large number of years that Vijay mentioned that I've been working have been spent working in lots of different physical, topographical, institutional, regulatory and cultural environments. And that's been great fun, but it's also given me, I think, a particular perspective around water challenges. And my current interests in my job with AMEC and with my professor work at Brunel University are very much around global water scarcity and water sustainability. I've only got 2 slides to show you today, you'll be pleased to hear. But They're going to be very detailed, and you will not be able to read them all, but I guess that you'll be able to pick up the detail of them later. On the first, I'm going to talk about the big global picture around water availability, and then secondly, I'm going to try and put that into the Californian and Bay Area perspective. In preparing my presentation, I've used two reports, and you're probably going to tell me that I used the wrong ones, but just so that you know what I've been using. The Public Policy Institute of California, Water and the Californian Economy. And secondly, I thought this was a really useful document by the Delta Stewardship Council, Facts and Information on California's Water Environmental Debates. So much of what I've said this morning, I'm going to say this morning in relation to California, comes from those documents. So, my first slide, the big picture. So, we all hear these big numbers about how much water is on the planet and how much of it is salty and how much of it's fresh. What interests me is what I call the water flux, the amount of rainfall and the amount of runoff. The amount of rainfall landing on the planet, on our land surface, and I'm using your units here as opposed to my units, around 27,500 cubic miles of water lands on the planet's land. About 11,000 cubic miles runs off into the sea, about 40% of it. But probably only about 3,000 of that 11,000 cubic miles is accessible to us, to society. Right now, we are abstracting about 1,000 cubic miles a year. So you can see the little table in the middle at the top there, what that water is being abstracted for. Most of it worldwide, rather 70% of it, is for agriculture, for irrigation. And this is water which is genuinely used because it, through the process of evapotranspiration, it grows the food. The amount that we abstract for drinking water purposes, although it isn't just drinking, is it, as we heard this morning, is a lot smaller. In the US, as an average, about 50% of abstracted water is used for irrigation. So moving on, global water scarcity. The map on the bottom left of the chart. We're now seeing emerging across the world areas which are where the demand on the water resources is greater than the supply. It may be a surprise for you to see that a lot of North America is yellow, amber and red, but there's a reason for that. And the reason is that North America is using a lot of its natural water resources for irrigation to grow food, not just for itself, but also for export. And I think that what we're seeing worldwide, excuse me for a moment, I'm drying up. What we're seeing worldwide is that the response to this spatial variation of water stress is a new phenomenon of emerging trade in virtual water. And by virtual water, I mean the water that is embedded in the growing of the crops and the goods which we all depend so much on. And if you look at that spidery diagram, bottom right-hand side, that's one of the latest maps of the virtual water connections between nations across the world. It's estimated that there's about 6,500 connections now between countries trading in goods which have got embedded water in it. The biggest single flow is from USA to Japan, and I wonder whether that's a surprise to a lot of people here. As yet, Vijay, there isn't a connection to Mars, but I've no doubt that we might be thinking of that one day. So to think about the big picture challenge around water, let's think about the footprint of mankind. The average water, the water footprint of the average person on the planet at the moment is about 800 gallons per day. Now, of course, that's the drinking water and all of the virtual water that's embedded in the crops and goods that we buy. The US figure per capita is about double that. So fundamentally, across the planet, we have enough fresh water. I don't think that that anybody is going to disagree with this, and probably enough for the 10 billion inhabitants that we're thinking about that the world might have towards the end of this century. But I think that our big challenge now on this big scale is one around the politics and economics of trading between nations, so that we're using water sensibly in those parts of the world where it exists. But there is the problem. There are lots of barriers between trading between companies. A lot of those are not intelligent when it comes to thinking about water. So I'm bringing this now to the Californian situation. As I said earlier, top left-hand diagram here, California has been managing its water resources in a very proactive and a very imaginative way for over a century. And it's seen many more interventions than many other nations and states. Some of these interventions have been noteworthy for their vision. And we heard this morning about the East Bay Mud. I hate this mud term, but anyway, East Bay Mud Water Company and its Pardee Reservoir. And there's the Hetch Hetchy scheme serving San Francisco. Controversial, which we all know, but these were visionary projects. But many of those interventions here in California have been about moving the water from the north to the south, and in many ways to facilitate food production. The growing of food today is the biggest user in California of water. But the importance of food production to California's GDP has fallen quite dramatically over the years. The chart on the bottom right-hand side is the number of employees in the different sectors, and you can see that it's now only 3% of Californians' population is working in food production. So, whilst the average US citizen isn't dependent upon external sources of water, sorry, I've missed a bit. Californians are. The Californian, as a state in the USA, is the biggest importer of virtual water, despite its big agricultural industry. Now, this is a really important issue. Of the US states, it is the biggest in terms of its import. Now, that import will be from other US states and other countries, and it amounts to around 650 gallons of virtual water per head of Californian. So the state has determined, as I understand it, that urban water use must be reduced by 20% through water conservation measures. But I think the studies have shown that this will not close the supply-demand gap. The little chart in the middle at the top is one which demonstrates that. And I think that, to my mind, and in answer to the question posed, new sources of water will need to be developed in California. They may be storage, they may be transfer, there may be more groundwater banking, they may be recycling, they may be capturing of more stormwater. But I think, I think there's a bigger question which California needs to think about, and that is the extent to which it wishes to be food secure in the future. It could be argued that California at the moment is not food secure because it is depending so much on food imported from other locations. And I think that the question of whether or not California wishes to either increase its food production or even decrease it from current levels will have a very major impact upon the need for more water or more water conservation. I feel that it is this question that perhaps is the bigger one. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Michael. The second speaker is Barry Nelson. He's a senior policy analyst with NRDC. Barry has worked in the California water issues for more than 25 years. He's also supported the formation of Delta Stewardship Council, which is very important to California's water. And also he was the chair of the campaign to pass Central Valley Project Improvement Act, which provided a lot of water to the state of California. Barry is a graduate of University of California. Go Bears. And Barry is going to talk about the water issues. Barry.
Thanks, Vijay. And I'd like to thank the Bay Planning Coalition for inviting me to speak today. And very much I'd like to thank Michael as well for really establishing a global framework with which to discuss California's water challenges. And that's really what I'm going to be focused on, of looking at California's water challenges. And I've now that we've moved from the global level to the state level, I've doubled his slides. I'll be doing 4, but really trying to focus on a couple of them in detail. First, this is a map of California, of the major water features in California water patches. That red outline you see is the Bay Delta watershed. Drains about 40% of the state of California, and it's an enormously important source of water for California. It provides something under 50% of the state's total water use. It's a very important resource for California, but it's not the only resource in California. There is a lively debate in the state right now over the future of the Bay Delta. That's not really the focus of our discussion today. From our perspective, we're critically in need of a comprehensive, effective, financeable plan for the Delta. It's something we're very focused on. But from our perspective, we also believe that, as important as that plan is, it's not likely to squeeze more water out of this system. As I said, that's not what we're here to talk about today, but I'd like to put the Bay Delta in context. Because, as I said, the Bay Delta is less than half of the state's water supply. Let's talk about the other half of the state's water supply. And this is where from our perspective, things get really interesting in California, because we have hit now on essentially every major river system in California, what we call peak water. If you look at the history of California's rivers, you can see a pretty consistent pattern. Over time, as our cities grow, as agriculture is developed, we've taken more and more water out of our rivers, and then something causes us to take less. And that pattern, growing demand, growing withdrawals, and then something causing us to take less out of that system, has now happened virtually across the state on essentially every one of our major river systems. And in some cases, that's driven by environmental needs. The Bay Delta is a good example of that. But there are a lot of other causes of what we've called the peak water symptom. One of them is that in many cases, demand simply exceeds available supply. That's happening on the Colorado River today, where we're using water out of the Colorado River at a faster rate than Mother Nature is providing that water. In our groundwater resources, we're using in California our groundwater at a faster rate than Mother Nature recharges that groundwater. We've hit some very real physical limits in terms of what we can extract from those systems over the long term. Air quality, the Owens Lake, for example, air quality with very real human health impacts has been a constraint on water management in the Owens River. Increasing demands by others. Again, on the Colorado River, California used to get more from the Colorado River than we get today. The reason we had to reduce our water use is because other states are taking more of the water to which they're entitled. And then finally, Native American rights on systems like the Trinity River. That's been a significant factor in that case. But when you look around the state, you can do a history of California looking at every major river system in the state that is connected by plumbing to the large agricultural and urban areas in California. That's the vast majority of the rivers in the state. We've started to hit real limits on those systems. And it's tremendously important that we ask where our future water supplies are going to come from. And then finally, I forgot to mention climate change. Most of the river systems in California are likely to be somewhat drier. The predictions, especially in Northern California, are a little bit mixed. But statewide, there's a good chance that California overall will be somewhat drier. We really are hitting some limits in terms of what we can squeeze out of our river and groundwater resources over the long term on a sustainable basis. So where do we go for our water supplies? We've talked about a concept we call the virtual river. Michael mentioned that conservation on its own isn't enough to close the gap, and he's absolutely right. This is a chart showing a comparison of how much California currently gets from the Colorado River, how much we export from the Bay Delta, and the maximum potential, most of these are state estimates, of how much water we can get from recycled water, groundwater, urban agricultural water use efficiency, and what we call green infrastructure, capturing urban stormwater. These are the state's most aggressive estimates. Now, you can see that volume of water is huge. It is basically more than equal to the amount of water we get from the Colorado and what we get from the Bay Delta. We think those estimates, when we dove into the state's estimates, Lester Snow is very familiar with those estimates, are frankly a little optimistic, and we shouldn't assume we're going to be able to get all of that water. So we then looked at much more modest goals, and this is the potential of the virtual river that we tend to think is a more realistic, ambitious, but a realistic target. And as you can see, it's just about 5 million acre-feet, just about as much water as we divert from the Bay Delta, as much water as we divert from the Colorado. And think about that. It means if we maximize what we can get from those 4 sources, it's roughly equivalent to finding a new Colorado River in California. It's an astonishing amount of water that's available to us that is increasingly cost-effectively available to us. And I'd like to close by focusing on just one example of that. I'm going to focus on the city of Los Angeles, in part because Northern California environmentalists are supposed to hate the folks in LA. They steal our water, they put it in swimming pools, all of that terrible stuff. But this is the city of Los Angeles' urban water management plan that adopted last year, 2 years ago. And what you can see here is that on the left, you see the LA Department of Water and Power's existing water supply portfolio, if you will. They get about a third of their water from their own pipeline to the Eastern Sierra, but they get almost half of their water from the Metropolitan Water District of Southern California. That's basically water in that part of Southern California. It's basically Bay Delta water. Half of their water, to meet the needs of Los Angeles, comes from the Bay Delta system. Now look at their adopted plan for 2035, a quarter century from now. What you can see is by investing in essentially the tools I was just talking about, stormwater capture, water transfers that has to be water conserved from agriculture, recycled water, conservation, groundwater. By investing in those tools, the city of Los Angeles' adopted proposal is to reduce their use of imported water by 50%. So as we're trying to figure out how to protect and restore the Bay Delta, something Fran Spivey-Weber spends a lot of her time thinking about, and as do we, the city of Los Angeles has really already written a blueprint that shows how we can do that. What I find really interesting is that increasingly these new investments that the city of Los Angeles is planning are cost-effective compared to where they are today. Imported water in Southern California in a couple of years is going to cost $1,000 an acre foot at the wholesale level. Conservation's cheaper. Water recycling is very close to the point where it's a coin toss in terms of cost between those two strategies, between imported water and recycled water. So not only is there a lot of water available from what we call the virtual river, but increasingly that's really cost-effective water supply. And this is a place where Northern California environmentalists and planners for the city of Los Angeles really have found a lot of agreement. And when you look at other cities in Southern California, the West Basin area, Long Beach, the city of Santa Monica, city of San Diego, more and more, it's not universal now across the Southern California water landscape. But there's a growing number of cities that recognize that these tools are the future of California water supply. And we often find ourselves in California water debating the wrong stuff. This is the right stuff. This is where California's water supply is going to come from. As much as we contest over the future of the Bay Delta, the swing between what we think is reasonably available and what the water export community would like to see is nothing like. It's a fraction of the 5 million acre feet that is available from this source of water. And I want to close simply by observing that over the course of the last quarter century or so, California's made major investments in energy efficiency. And California is now one of certainly the nation's most energy efficient state in terms of energy consumed per dollar generated by our economy. That has positioned California to be a very competitive state in the global economy. And we can do exactly the same thing by investing in workable, cost-effective, environmentally preferable from our perspective, water supplies that can meet the growing needs of California. These are really workable strategies that we think can position California to be competitive in the future, just as our investments in energy efficiency have done over the last 25 years. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Barry. That was an excellent presentation, especially highlighting some of the work LADW has done. So thank you so much for thinking about that. This is a wonderful panel because you can see they give you a perspective of the global water issues as well as the regional. And now the next speaker, Val Frenkel, he has expertise in membrane technologies. As you know, desalination depends on membranes. So Dr. Frenkel has been working on desalination for more than 30 years, and he has published more than 100 papers and textbooks. He has expertise in wastewater membrane water use. So he's the right guy to tell us where the new water comes from. So no pressure, Val, we need to get water cheap.
I will try. Okay, thank you, Vijay, and thank you for inviting me, and I hope you will not regret when my presentation will be over. So starting just topic as that panels, Vijay started from astronaut heading to the Mars looking for the water. When they just turn and head back, they see in the blue planet, and they're very happy we have plenty of water on the planet and should be sufficient for everybody. Is that true? Now let's go from the space to the California, probably better. Northern California is a better place. Let's go to South California, particularly Hollywood. Let's see what Spielberg think about that. Maybe another Jurassic 3 or 4 movie. What will happen if the gravity will disappear with our planet? Like big planet, larger size than Earth, will approach close to us. What will happen with our water? And take a look on that small blue ball. That's all what we have. So as you may see, our planet is about, at the bottom, 700 kilometer, 400 miles radius. The all water what we have on a planet, it will be about 10 times small radius. So actually the radius of that blue ball, it's about the distance from here to Hollywood. So when we're talking we have a lot of water, it's not the truth. We don't have much water here too. And good news, but we have more than on Mars people have. So out, if you will take a look, you see that on the corner, that blue ball, 700 kilometers or radius, or 400 miles radius. Is that something we can consume right at the spot? The answer is no. As you may know, 97% of that is still salty. It's an ocean, sea. Salinity 35,000 milligram per liter. It's 35 gram per liter of the salt. It's very salty. You can taste it if you go to drink Pacific Ocean water. So all we do have, it's 0.6%. You see that small piece of that pie? It's a groundwater. Half of it sits on a depth more than 2,300 feet. What does it mean? Just to bring it to the surface, we need more energy than desalinate the seawater. So practically for our consumption, the normal consumption on the fresh water, we have 0.3% on the ground, and 0.1% this is all surface water. So we have less than 0.5% of that ball that we can consume as a fresh water. So I would agree probably with Lester that we have enough fresh water, that 0.5% enough for 10 billion people. But the problem being, and the problem is always, that those people are not residing where the source is. And California is a good example. Actually, the Alex Coden, first speaker at that workshop, he even mentioned that most of the population living in Southern California, but most of the supply is Northern California. And that happened everywhere around the world. And beyond that, the distance between the consumption or demand and supply can be miles, 100 miles. And the more of that, could be the borders between states and even the countries. And I've been to the places where there is only 2 solution people have to leave: or desalt the water or just walk away. There's no other source. We all familiar with the water cycle. What's water cycle is? We talk about it a lot, but actually what it stands for. Actually, the water cycle, that is the natural process that allow us to live on this planet. Should that process will stop or will be reduced in intensity, we will be having probably a hard time. And at the very beginning, back to the millenniums, we probably wouldn't be exist at all. So, and how it works? Actually, it's a very simple process. From the ocean, that blue pool, water evaporates to the sky, to the clouds, precipitates on the poles, goes to the feed our rivers and our ground horizon. Those are sources for our water that we consume as a fresh water. And rest flows back to the ocean. So actually, this is the natural desalination process. And why it happened? Because we have a free energy source. So we have a free energy generator. And here's the three really the major sources what we should and we are exploring when we need more water. Precipitation or snow caps, reuse, that's what we get in on a discharge, and ocean, which is drive us or leads us toward desalination. So how it looks like, it's just schematically shown the pretty same slide, like more technically. On the left side, you can see the source of the water, the drinking water supply as when we consume it, and whichever goes on our waste discharge, what we call it, which is the same water again. It's a wastewater. We can use that for potable, not potable, or indirect potable. One of the projects actually starting in US, currently in Texas, as an additional water supply source. So, and we have three options when we need more water. The first one is a conservation. The second one is reuse. The third one, desalination. Why I'm ranking those? Because that is the presumably from the lowest cost to the highest cost. But no, it may be not the case everywhere. So, what we consider and how we consider the new water source, which way to go? Conservation, the reuse, or desalination? First of all, availability. Second one is sustainability of the water supply for a long term. That's what we are looking for. Quality of source water and treatment, which is required because it drives the cost. Environmental aspects, big issue in California. Regulatory compliances when developing a new source, big issue in California. And the last one, let me guess, cost, right? So, unfortunately or fortunately, cost is always one of the biggest ticket items and players in the development of new water source, and particularly in a bad economy where we're at now. And we should not forget what challenge being brought to the professional, and I'm representing probably engineering community in water delivery and water source and water management, and that what being said by John Fitzgerald Kennedy in 1961. So it's actually more than 50 years ago. So we really need to get and find a way how to make the water cheap, inexpensive, and available for the humanity for the long run and long term. And that slide I will be doing the run. It's actually, to some extent, they repeat it. It's schematic. If someone wants to explore the new sources, can follow that as a map summary. And in a summary, we should diversify our portfolio. Definitely. If we need more water, we need to diversify our portfolio, and that is not secret, and many people doing that, and everyone to understand that. And our diversification should be the smart diversification, and it could be very different depending on the place and availability of different sources. We need to explore conservation. Yes, no one would argue that. We need to explore reuse, and we need to explore desalination. On a long run, we may be still short in a water supply. And with that, thank you.
Thank you, Val. That was a great presentation. Specifically, what I liked your three-pronged approach: conservation, reuse, and desalination. For people who are not familiar with some of the costs in Europe, the water is very expensive in Europe. Here we take it for granted. Last time our family took a cruise to Mediterranean. At the end of the cruise, just the water bill for our lunch and dinner was so expensive, I came home and hugged our faucet. Okay, so from that perspective, desalination will be the future for additional water supply. The next speaker is Lester Snow. He doesn't need any introduction. Most of us know him, but I'll just briefly tell about some of the great things he has done over his career. Currently, he directs the California Water Foundation program. Lester served as the California Secretary for Natural Resources, where he oversaw 25 departments, commissions, and conservancies. He was also the director of California Department of Water Resources and executive director of CalFed. So these agencies have done marvelous and wonderful job managing California water resources. If there is one person who can help us with these water challenges on Earth, it's Lester. And for good luck, we're going to throw the Mars also.
Mission to Mars, yes. We can build a pipeline. I'm the last speaker. I've got 53 slides, and I have no sense of time whatsoever. So, okay, no, it's not quite that way. I want to hit actually maybe some new points, but actually I'm going to go to some themes that Fran and Barry had, and then some that I think have been woven through just about every presentation. That's a portfolio approach. That's how we're going to move forward. One of my basic issues, and it's been an issue for a long time, is that on natural resource issues in general and water resource issues in particular, we have fallen into a pattern of crisis management. We don't start taking action on, say, the interface between water and ecosystem until there's an endangered species, and typically that's too late. You can't fix it at that point. We have to move much more aggressively into integrated resource management as an approach to dealing with our issues. Maybe one of the best examples of crisis management is in Australia. We're all kind of awed with the things that they did as a result of their 10-year drought that they called the Big Dry. You have to keep in mind they didn't start initiating those actions until about year 8 of the drought. And then earlier this year, all the reservoirs filled and declared the drought over, and people are calling for backing off on the actions that they took during the drought. There's a powerful lesson there. This slide doesn't show up real well. I want to give just a little more historical context of the way we have developed the California economy. And you kind of start with the Los Angeles Aqueduct in 1908, and you steadily march through these infrastructure projects that were designed to develop water where it occurs, store it, and move it through pipelines to where people need it. That's the basic issue of water management in California. And you go through those to the last project, major project, was the State Water Project. And in every single case, those projects are not capable of delivering the water they were designed to deliver or once did at their peak deliveries. And in every case, there were unintended consequences. And so that we built our economy on that, and now they're less reliable as well as simply getting older, as many of us are, apparently. The other context that I would provide, the problems we have didn't just happen because people started developing water. We had state and federal policy that had a great impact on our natural resource system. And I always list the Swamp and Overflow Act, and I'm sure most of you read that on your way in today. It was a whole series of acts passed by Congress starting in the 1850s that applied to a lot of other states. But in California, it basically said these swamp areas in the state that are federal land and overflow flood areas, the state can have that land if they develop a program to give it to private individuals who will drain the swamps. Now, we call swamps wetlands now. That was very effective. That's how the Delta turned into farming areas, as people claimed it, drained the swamps, and started farming. Central Valley Flood System, let me go ahead and skip ahead to a slide. This is one of the East Bay mud projects underway right now. This was the famous enigmatic kind of hydraulic mining that took place. This is a picture probably from the 1870s. And it washed so much debris down into the system that resulted in one of the nation's first environmental laws, where farmers, fishermen, and boat captains came together and said, we've got to stop this. It's causing flooding, getting all this debris, killing things, blocking up our fields. Now, what happened was you designed then a flood system with very narrow levees to wash this stuff out of the valley. So as a result of swamp and overflow, a flood system to deal with hydraulic mining, we have lost over 95% of the riparian habitat in the Central Valley and over 90% of the wetlands in the Central Valley. So that's then the system that we're trying to manage in a balanced way. In terms of water crisis, people have hit these things. We have a rapidly growing population, the aging infrastructure related to those projects that I mentioned, groundwater overdraft, which I'll hit in a little more detail in a moment, degraded ecosystems, increasing conflict, and then overlay that with increased risk and uncertainty due to climate change. So that's my upbeat message for all of you today. To illustrate the climate change, this is off the American River. Then you can see the dashed line is when Folsom Dam was completed. When the Bureau of Reclamation started planning for Folsom Dam, it was probably 1946, somewhere in that range. And so all good water engineers of that era, and even today, you plan by looking backward. You look back at the record, the hydrologic record. And so when I look back, there was never this kind of 3-day peak flow over 100,000 CFS. Since then, there have been 5. And it's increasing. And this is what our new reality is as a result of climate change. The point here is we often talk about climate change is going to affect us in the future. It has already fundamentally changed our hydrograph and water occurrence and is continuing to do so. This is a groundwater overdraft. And so the blue lines are the change in storage by year. And so no big surprise, that big line going down, which means a depletion, is the 76-77 drought. And 83 is the big line going up. That is the floods of 83. And so a lot of groundwater recharge took place during this flood, a lot of groundwater overdraft. The bigger issue here is the red line. That is the cumulative debt. If this were a budget, if the zero line was a balanced budget, and then each of these blue lines are our withdrawals and deposits, the red line is our cumulative debt. It's like the federal debt. That's 120 million acre-feet we have removed from the aquifers of California that has not been replenished and will not be replenished. So that's equivalent to 26 Lake Shastas. It's equivalent to doubling the storage on the Colorado River. It's equivalent to completely draining Lake Tahoe. That is not a proposal, by the way. Here's where I get into, Fran talked about, there's no silver bullet. It has to be a diverse strategy, an integrated strategy. And my big issue, the last bullet here, is you have to manage water as a natural resource. It's not a commodity until you have exported it out of the natural system. And then you can do what you can with it and use it as a very valuable commodity. But until then, you have to manage it from the crest of the watershed all the way to the ocean. And we don't do enough of that. California Water Foundation, I put it up as these are the things that we're pursuing, but this is what all of the progressive water management agencies are pursuing. And that is whole programs of efficiency, of making, once you divert a unit of water out of the system, use it as effectively and efficiently as you can, conservation, wastewater recycling, stormwater capture, everything that you can think of needs to be done with that unit of water. Groundwater, we have to switch. Those blue charts or blue lines on that previous graph actually illustrate how effective groundwater storage can be to grab some of those increasing peaks, get them in our groundwater basins, and use them when we have droughts. The third element that we're interested in, as I mentioned, we've kind of destroyed the river's habitat in the Central Valley. If we're going to bring balance back to the system, we have to restore some of the floodplain and floodplain habitat to reduce the conflict between ecosystem and water supply. And we need a management system that helps start to break down those silos that we've created that make it so hard to manage water in an integrated way. one of our thoughts on this is that we need diverse and non-traditional coalitions. And the one I always bring up is the business community. California water is so complex that it's hard for the business community to get engaged, and yet they have to get engaged. I think the traditional wars that take place between the standard parties in Sacramento can only accomplish what I would call incremental improvement. And in my opinion, our water institutions, water institutional infrastructure is evolving slower than our water reality is changing. And we need to modify that. We need to change more quickly to keep up with the changes that are actually happening in the system. We need a sustainable system. That means resilient ecosystems, diverse and adaptable water supplies. We know big droughts are coming. It's just as likely that we would experience a big dry, an Australian type of drought here. And I might add, if we did, we had an economist look at what happened there, apply it to California, and that would mean a big dry here would be a $50 billion total negative economic impact, 114,000 people out of work, and a 30% reduction in agriculture in the state. And we tend to think that those things happen elsewhere, like in Australia. Those will happen here, and we need to prepare for it. This is another way of portraying the stuff that Barry put up. On the right-hand side here, the point is we need to manage it as a system, as a natural resource system. We have all of this water that's available, some of them in very small kinds of projects, but nonetheless cost-effectively available. You probably can approach this 6 million acre-feet somewhere in the range of $5 to $8 billion of investment. Sounds like a lot, but compared to other alternatives, probably not. So there is a path forward. It's an integrated approach to it. We have to get focused, and we have to invest. We have to get beyond the reluctance of boards of directors, certainly not the ones that would set up here, to raise rates and invest in these projects to anticipate what's going to happen and not wait for the next crisis. Thank you.
Thank you, Lester. That was a great summary of the solutions, and then you touched upon what we call social, environmental, and economical. Before we start the questions, there are some great questions I received, but I want to put these questions in the context. Supplying water to our residents, industries, is not an easy challenge. I can tell you, based on what we have seen, the most expensive part is what we call last 1 mile of supply. And Alex can vouch for it. It costs a lot of money to get water in the last 1 mile from these users, because you need to basically supply water 24/7, whether they're using it or not. Also, you need to size these facilities for what we call peak use. That means everybody using either in the morning or in the evenings. That's, again, no different than other industries where the last 1 mile is a challenge. Same with US Postal Service or FedEx. They bring in their packages in a large truck or a plane, but they cost a lot of money for them to deliver in the last 1 mile. So one of the great questions came on from the audience is it time for use of metering, an option for the water industry, similar to what they do in the power industry? Maybe I can direct this question to our first speaker, Michael, because in London, they do this called congestion pricing. You think all those Mini Coopers, they go fast? No, they still have a lot of congestion in London. So maybe you can hear your perspective on pricing water at different times of the day.
Okay, Vijay, thank you. And well, I'm not sure whether it's a direct analogy with the London congestion charging, but let me see. Let me tell you something interesting about the UK. Our government has come down against metering full stop. Now, you must find that quite incredible, and so do I. But why is this? And I think that it comes down to one of the fundamental issues about how much we actually pay for this liquid which arrives in our taps. in the view of the government in the UK, maybe we need to be metering in places in the UK which are extremely dry. That's a position which they've stated. I disagree fundamentally with this, because I agree with Leicester's view, which is that the national water resource needs to be managed for the national good, and therefore having a limited type of metering of that type I wouldn't support. What I do support, Vijay, and this is similar to what you're saying, is compulsory metering everywhere, but a metering tariff regime which gives you a certain amount of water, which you might say is that a minimum amount which the United Nations thinks we should have, which might be for drinking and basic personal hygiene, at a let's call it a knockdown rate, but that if you successively use more for more of these, let's say, activities which are not necessary for human life, then we should pay progressively more for it. So that for things like washing one's car or watering the lawn or taking 6 showers a day, you pay more for it per unit rate. Different times of day, I'm not so sure. I'm not so sure about that as a proposal, but certainly a staggered tariff, yes.
Thank you, Michael. The second question is for Val Frenkel. Could you explain the effect of global warming on the water cycle? And would it increase the fresh water from evaporation of seawater and transfer to rainwater?
Okay, what the global warming really what stands for, at least in definition, the current definitions, that on polar caps they melting down, and they to some extent increasing salinity decreasing salinity of the ocean water in the areas, and they're raising the level of the overall water ocean. If you remember that pie chart, to go back, it's polar caps, they still keep about 0.6% of the entire water in the cycle. I would really question if that will affect the water supply. How question is raised exactly?
Does the global warming increases evaporation so that you get more rain?
If you remember that slide on the what our astronauts should see behind when they go into the Mars, it's 70% of the planet is still covered by the ocean. So most of the rain still falling down there. So I personally, I don't have a statistics or projection on that or modeling, but I would question if that really will increase the rainfalls on the planet. I don't believe, at least I wouldn't count on that.
So this next question is to Barry Nelson. Barry, you talked about a virtual river. So we wish we could just go there and tap it and then use it. So what are the implementation challenges in terms of social, environmental, and economic?
Great question. And I'll go back to the city of Los Angeles for a moment. The city has adopted a very ambitious urban water management plan. Something could be stronger, but when you look at a proposal to cut in half the amount of water they import from basically from Northern California, that's a pretty ambitious effort. They're in the middle right now, the LA Department of Water and Power in the city is in the middle right now of looking at their water rates. And they actually just split their rates in half. They adopted a new energy rate structure, but they delayed their new water rate structure. These are tough economic times in California, and water agencies are facing a lot of pushback from ratepayers resistant to higher water costs. And as Lester said, you can't wait for the crisis to happen to make those investments that take decades. We have to make those investments now, and we have to make those investments on an ongoing basis. And I think this is one of those places where sort of alliance Lester mentioned is absolutely critical. I think it is really important for environmentalists to work with really far-sighted water agencies and business leaders and make a case to the public for making investments that are going to take decades. But we have to make those investments now because, as Lester said, we can't wait for the crisis to occur and then decide, you know, we really should have built that wastewater recycling plant a decade ago. It takes a while to build these facilities. But one of the real challenges really is funding. We see that at the local level. We see that at the state level. The water bond has been mentioned a number of times. It's been delayed twice. The governor in recent comments suggested that water bond is likely to be renegotiated. And that's going to be tough. It's going to renegotiated, meaning that bond may well wind up being smaller before it eventually goes to the ballot, goes to the public. And that's going to be tough, and it's going to require, I think, a lot of collaboration between folks who I think actually have a lot of common ground, but haven't spent as much time working together on water issues as we need to.
Thank you, Barry. This next question is a little bit controversial. As most of you know, there is a ballot measure in San Francisco called Measure F. The proponents wants to restore HHE Valley. So the audience question is interested hearing probably from Lester about whether that makes sense or not.
Oh, my mic's not on. Well, you know, that's an interesting question. You know, if I'd have gone through each of the projects as they developed, you could think of the Los Angeles aqueduct project in 1908 when they did the second phase of it. That's the famous Chinatown movie. And the way that project was done, it has put a cloud over water transfers in the entire West for over 100 years. Everybody talks about, you know, somebody wants to buy some water and they don't want to become another Owens Valley. And so it had that kind of legacy. Well, Hetch Hetchy is very similar. I mean, you're probably aware of the fights that John Muir had with O'Shaughnessy and the city at the time to try to preserve it, and went to Washington. And of course, you had the Sierra Club that in no small part was created out of that. The controversy has never gone away. And there is a vision of what that sister valley could be like in Yosemite Valley. So I'll just give you kind of a very personal take on this. Would it be nice to have a beautiful valley like Yosemite Valley and take the pressure off of it? Of course. Who wouldn't want that? Then what's the cost of doing that? What are the implications of doing that? You probably know, if you're from the Bay Area here, that is a pressurized system that delivers pristine water and generates electricity, doesn't use electricity. So you've got to deal with what are the water quality implications, where does the energy come from that you're going to forego when you leave it up there, and what's the cost? And if it costs a lot, where does it fit into your community's priorities? And I think you see two things going on this ballot. Is it a measure or initiative?
It's a measure.
A measure? Or proposition? I get confused. But anyway, you have some people that are just reacting and saying we should not do this. And you have others that I think are thinking that, you know, when it gets to the end of its engineering life, whenever that happens and we can afford it, let's look at other alternatives. But at this point in time, I don't see how you consider taking down the reservoir. That's probably the concise answer you wanted at the beginning of this, wasn't it?
Thank you, Lester. That was a very smart answer.
We will see.
So we got about 4 minutes left, so I would like to maybe invite each panel members to take a minute to make your kind of a closing thoughts or statements. I will start with Lester.
That may have been my closing thought. I'm not really sure. I guess all I would say is kind of reiterate maybe in summary fashion. Our water resource situation has become less certain. We have greater variability and volatility in our water supplies, and we need to address that. And it can be addressed. And it is a portfolio-based approach. It takes investment. The most recent ASCE report card for California, I think, comes up with a $12 billion annual shortfall in water infrastructure investment. If we don't address that, we're going to have crisis after crisis, and wonder how we got here and want to change. And we can get out in front of those issues and make the right kinds of investment to avoid that problem.
Thank you. Val?
Yeah, in Northern California, probably many people thinking that next war will be for wine, but probably will be for water. So let's just sound in with Lester. We should not wait for crisis. It will come. And we need to explore and diversify our portfolio and explore all options. And just as a side note, don't disregard desalination, and particularly on a long-run supply. I've been around the globe. It's a part of the portfolio for many communities, large industry, and so on. However, I think it's a little bit on the side in California today.
Thank you, Val. Barry?
You know, I think all of us in different ways have talked about a portfolio approach to investments, but you can't invest equally in everything simultaneously. So 3 thoughts about how we make progress on that portfolio approach. First is through what in the energy world is called a loading order. You start with the less expensive stuff and you build up to the more expensive stuff. And we think that needs to be more of a conscious strategy in California. That is the conscious strategy at the local level to an enormous extent. It's not always the conscious strategy in the statewide policy debate, and we think that would be enormously helpful. Second is collaboration on some of these areas where we have a lot of common ground. We need a lot more of that. And finally, and I think this is really the most important thing, is recognizing where we have an enormous amount of common ground on in terms of the solutions the state needs to invest in, and finding ways to work together on those issues more effectively than we sometimes have in the past. That recognition, especially from non-traditional water players, environmentalists and water agencies work on these issues all the time. The business issues and other sectors of society don't focus on water issues all the time, but these issues are absolutely central to our long-term success, and broadening the recognition of that common ground, I think, is the real start of progress.
Thank you, Barry. Michael?
Excuse me. Yes, well, I'd like to pick up on, to finish with a theme that Lester mentioned earlier, integrated management of our natural resource. I think this is where the nub of the problem is. We don't see as society just how important water is to us. We know that it's important for drinking, but we've lost sight of its importance to supplying our food, supplying our clothing, and maintaining our ecosystems with all the services that they give us in turn. And I think that we're in danger, I think, of being run by economists who tell us that it'll all be fixed through water prices. Now, whilst I believe that there's a degree of truth in that, I think that leaving the solving of the water issues to the markets isn't going to do it. And so I'm going to agree with Lester that what we need to see is more proactive management of this resource by our nations and our states. And that's going to require something more than raising our water industry rates. It's going to mean effort and money from our central and statal governments.
Thank you, Michael. Go ahead, Val.
Yeah, I just want to add one point here, and in light of the topic of this workshop, that water energy nexus, and it's a very correct nexus, because we always talking about energy for water production, but actually cost of the energy for water and energy cost depends on the cost of the water. It's really bifold the connection. So it does affect it both ways. So we should not disregard that.
Thank you. Let's give a big hand to all the 4 panelists. Great presentations.